Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the under the radar games that we just didn't have quite a chance to get to during the week, but some really, really good ones. I cannot wait for that Oregon Boise State matchup. Really excited for that UTSA Texas State one as well. So, cannot wait for this weekend, but let's get into some players and some coaches that have a lot to prove this upcoming weekend. There are so many big time games. There are so many moments where I think a lot of people's, this sounds a little bit crazy, I understand, but I think some people's lives can change this weekend. And it depends on what they do on Saturday, but I think a lot of things can change in some of these kids and coaches' lives if they can put together a really good performance. And I think it's one of those things where you look at all of the incredible players all across the country in these big time games. I could put a spotlight on about 100 different people across the country, obviously, but I'm going to stick to some of the bigger games here. And Rocco Becht is a very interesting one to me. I think he's one of those players that you're walking into this game and all the talk is about how bad these offenses are. All the talk is about how this is going to be a rock fight and whoever can, just get that 3 yards on third down at the very end of the game is going to be able to win it. So it's one of those games where you have an opening, right? No one's expecting points. No one's thinking that this is going to be an offensive explosion. Rocco Becht and Iowa State have an opening here to do something that I think turned the college football world on its head a little bit, because not only has Iowa kind of dominated this series recently, but you're going into Kinnick Stadium. You have a very talented team going up against Phil Parker on the other side, which is going to be a handful for him to deal with. If they can handle all of that, if they can walk in there and put up points and get Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins in on the action very, very early, get Abu Sama going, and score some points against this Iowa defense, this kid turns from someone that in passing, you might know his name but don't really know many details about him, to a household name in a second. This is a very, very talented kid, and one of those guys that when he walks on the field, he can change a game in a second. He can do things with his legs that are really special. He has a comfort in this offense. He has weapons all over the field. So I think when you look at this game, obviously everyone's talking about the defenses, and that's what a lot of the NFL scouts will be there for. But if Rocco Becht can put on a show, I think he becomes not only someone that we talk about more in the college football world this year, but he becomes kind of an Iowa State legend in some ways. He becomes a guy that can launch them into places that they haven't been since Brock Purdy was there, and maybe even further back if they can find their way into the playoffs. So I think it's more of just kind of a message sender for Rocco Becht more than anything else. It's about showing that you are a player that is going to be a problem for any defense in the country, because frankly, if you're a problem for Iowa, you're a problem for everyone. I can promise you that. So it's going to be a really fun game. But then on the other side, Tim Lester's got to be able to match that, because we know that Rocco Becht is good. We know that Jaden Higgins is good. We know Jalen Noel is good. We know Abu Sama is good. We know that this Iowa State offense has dudes. You're going to be able to counter that. And Phil Parker is going to do a great job on the defensive side. But at the end of the day, Iowa's going to have to score points in this game. It's not going to be a game that they're going to be able to win 10-3. At least I don't think that's the way it's going to go. I think they're going to have to win this game by scoring somewhere in the 20s. I think it's going to be one of those types of games where Iowa State forces your hand just enough. Tim Lester is a very good OC. He's one of those guys that came down from the NFL and has melded the NFL approach to the Iowa approach, and it's made it really, really interesting because it's not all that different. The reality is what they want to do is they want to establish the run, they want to get that going, and then they want to attack the middle of the field. The biggest difference is the pre-snap motion and the different personnel groups that are attacking that middle of the field. It's wide receivers on the outside more often now than it was tight ends coming up the seam. So I think that's kind of the biggest difference here, is you have an ability to not only throw the ball and not only stretch the ball around the field, but those running lanes get bigger because Iowa State has to spread guys out, has to be able to guard Reese Vanderzee and all of these talented wide receivers. So now that you have those guys, and now that you have a guy that is going to employ pre-snap motion and get those defenses just thinking a little bit more, I think this Iowa offense is going to be fine. I don't necessarily think it's going to be explosive or anything crazy, but all they really needed in the past was openings. All they really needed was that one linebacker to be moved out of the box by a motion across the way, and then you have a 7-yard run. I think that's the difference that he brings, and I think he's got to show it this week against an Iowa State defense that is going to be well prepared to take on this challenge. this is the number one guy in my opinion. I feel like this is bar none the number one guy, and it's not necessarily because of what this season has to hold, because obviously there's plenty ahead of him with Georgia on the schedule, with possible SEC, CFP aspirations. There's plenty on the table for this one, but I was listening to On Texas a couple of days ago, and CJ Vogel and all the guys over there were talking about this, and they said this is the draft game. This is the game where he proves that he is not only a really, really good college quarterback, someone that can possibly make it in the NFL, but you have questions about, to a guy that is a bona fide first-round talent. I think, to be honest, I do think he is a first-round talent. I think he's one of those guys that is going to get into the first round because the physical ability by itself gives you enough reason to feel good about this kid. The difference comes when he has to face those big-time defenses. And guess what? Wink Martindale's on the other sideline. A defensive coordinator that was in the NFL for so long, knows just about everyone in the NFL, and everyone in the NFL respects. So if Quinn Ewers walks up into Ann Arbor and puts up 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, is very good in completion percentage, and looks in total control of this offense, that's going to be the moment. That's going to be the moment that everyone brings up on tape when they're talking about Quinn Ewers in the draft process. They're going to say, he walked in there and showed Wink Martindale that you cannot stop me. I think that's the biggest thing here. So on top of that pressure, he has a chance this weekend to cement himself as one of the best quarterbacks in Texas history and get his big-time signature win away from home on top of that Alabama win. So he would become one of those players that you just never forget if you're Texas. And frankly, I think he might already be there, but I think if he puts together a win this weekend and then finds his way to possibly the playoff later on, he might just jump Colt McCoy. I don't know if he's getting over Vince Young, I'll be honest, but he might just jump Colt McCoy in that echelon of Texas quarterbacks. But a lot on this kid's shoulders. A lot of his future could be decided on Saturday if he can deliver the way that he very much wants to. Sherrone Moore on the other side has to be on this list because Sherrone Moore last year won big games for them. He was the head coach in the Penn State, in the Maryland game, I believe, and then the Ohio State game to finish off the season. So he's had big moments. He's been on the sideline, been the head coach for those 4 hours. Outside of those 4 hours, he was not the head coach. This is his team. This is his program. He is the head guy. He's the guy standing out in front. This is the game where he gets his first big win. And I understand the Ohio State and Penn State game deserve a lot of respect. And I'm not taking anything away from those games by any means, but I do think this is an opening for him to show that this is my team. It's no longer me just trotting out Jim Harbaugh's team to win some games. It's me taking over this team, changing it just a little bit, and making it my own, and we're still the same tough, hard-nosed team that you remember. So, obviously, this falls on, Kirk Campbell a lot as well with how you're going to rotate quarterbacks, how are you going to go about the offense. So, some more technical parts of that as well, but I think when you look at the big picture, Sherrone Moore is your head coach now. He has changed some things over the last little bit. There have been a lot of turmoil around there. If he walks out on that field and wins on Saturday, this is your guy for a very long time because the amount of things that he's had to deal with early on in his career is absolutely ridiculous at Michigan, and being able to walk in against a team that very much expects to be in the playoff in Texas and just dominating them possibly on the line of scrimmage is going to make Michigan fans feel incredibly confident about what you have going forward. So it's all about the game plan, obviously figuring out how you're going to utilize these quarterbacks, but overarching than that, it's going to be a game that might just define his career at Michigan for at least the next little bit until he gets that next big game chance. But Deion Sanders is another one that we got to talk about because we talked about all of the different variables around Colorado all offseason. Whenever you bring in a ton of different portal players, there's a little bit more variability of what you're going to get week to week. That's just the reality of college football at this point. Florida State showed that the first 2 weeks of the season. But I think this is one of those moments for Deion where he can show that he's doing the way he's doing things is not the wrong way. I think there's a great chance for him to prove that because when you walk into Lincoln, Nebraska and you play this team, you have to have toughness. You have to have mental, physical, and you have to have togetherness, which has been the big criticism of this Deion team. I don't necessarily buy into that quite as much as some people do, but there is an ability in some other teams to be player-led, to be really intense about those players going out and demanding the best from each other. That doesn't happen quite as easily on on transfer portal type teams. It doesn't mean that it can't happen on those teams, but at the end of the day, this is a moment where he can walk into Lincoln, Nebraska with a ton of portal players against a team that has a ton of homegrown talent. That's one of those, very normal structured teams, and beat them and show the world and show everyone that they are tough, they are physical, they have that drive, they have that culture that a lot of people have said they haven't had in the past. So I think it's one of those moments where if they come out of this thing with a win, I'm talking very differently about Colorado. Not because, maybe the game goes totally different than I expect and, Nebraska plays the ugliest game in the world, but you have to have physicality to beat this team. Period. End of story. You know that the defensive line for Nebraska is going to be a problem. You know the offensive line is very experienced. You know that they're going to try to run the ball. If Colorado can win a game doing all of those things, then they're going to be a team that's going to be a problem in the Big 12, point blank period. I tend to believe that it's going to be a little bit of a struggle for them on Saturday, but if Dion and his boys can go out there and play really good football and be physical more than anything else, I'm talking about them as possibly winning the Big 12, no longer as a team that if they make a bowl game, they're feeling really good. So a lot on Deion Sanders' shoulders every single week, obviously, but particularly this week heading up to Lincoln. And then on the other side, he's got to deal with this kid. Dylan Raiola is very, very talented, but he is a freshman. This is one of those moments where he's going to have plenty of big-time moments throughout his career if he has the career that we expect. But there's this thing that happens with quarterbacks, especially young quarterbacks when they're thrust into these big spots. They need that big win. They need that big first moment to get them going. They need that moment that makes them feel like they can take over this team and feel great about where they're going. It happened with Quinn Ewers against Oklahoma where they absolutely blew him out. From that day forward, that was a different quarterback. That was a guy that had way more confidence in what he could do on the football field. That was a guy that was way more comfortable in that system. And that was a guy that was one of the best quarterbacks in the country. That is what Dylan Raiola can do on Saturday. Now, it's a lot to put on his shoulders. I'm not doubting that by any means, and we'll get into that, I believe, in the next segment or a couple of segments here. But this is one of those moments. Nebraska fans have never been more excited. You're on primetime TV against a rival, against one of the most talked about teams in the entire country. This is the moment where you prove you are who everyone thinks you are. You are the guy that walked out with an almost perfect rating from high school, and you are actually that guy. It's not smoke and mirrors, not anything different. You are downright special, and this is the moment to show that. Nico Imaliava, same exact thing. If he can deliver the way that he wants to on Saturday night, this is not only a kid that we're talking about in the future of NFL drafts, we're talking about him very, very quickly in the Heisman race. This is a guy that he's one of those players that every now and then you find a guy that throws the ball with such confidence, that throws with such zip and preparation and all of the different things that you want in an NFL quarterback, and you just get enamored. You fall in love with the mechanics. You fall in love with how clean everything looks. This could be that weekend for a lot of people. I think whenever anyone watches Nico Iamaleava throughout this year, they're going to see him and be like, is there anyone on planet Earth that can play quarterback better than this kid? Because he jumps off the page. It's really remarkable to watch him go to work, and I think this is that moment where a Heisman run can start, an SEC run can start, a playoff run can start, but it's all come down to this kid. Can he deliver on Saturday night? And if he can, then a lot of people are going to be saying that name on Monday. I can promise you that. Or trying to say that last name on Monday. Tony Gibson on the other side is going to have his hands full. A very, very good defensive coordinator for NC State that has been around the block a number of times. And Dave Doran and him are really a match made in heaven because they play hard-nosed football. That's the way they go about business over at NC State. And I don't think they're going to be scared of the physicality of Tennessee. I don't think that's the way that Tennessee's really going to hurt them. Now, I do think Tennessee has the advantage there, but I think NC State's going to be relatively up to the challenge with their front seven. The back end is going to be a problem. There's almost no doubt about that. And frankly, I think he's going to have to blitz a lot in this game, so it's going to be even more of a problem. You're going to have to make sure that those guys are ready to go. So it's one of those moments that I understand it might be a little bit overblown, but he's playing a Tennessee team that we've seen can put up points against essentially anyone in the country. We've seen what Nico can do. We have all this hype going one direction. If Tony Gibson goes out there, puts together an incredible game plan, and that North Carolina defense just totally stops the Tennessee offense, this is a guy that's up for a head coaching job at the end of the year. So again, like Quinn Ewers in the draft and possibly changing his life this Saturday, another guy that can change his life this Saturday is Tony Gibson. And I don't know what his long-term plans are. I don't know if he's very happy in Raleigh and wants to hang out there. But at the end of the day, he's one of those guys that has been really good for a really long time, just hasn't had that moment where their defense just plays really well against opponent where you would not expect that by any means. And if he can do that, then his life could change forever in a hurry on Saturday. But going to be so much fun to watch all these guys. A couple other ones to watch: Taylon Green against Oklahoma State, Alan Bowman on the other side of that game, and then Dylan Gabriel has a ton on his shoulders going into that week, going into that game against Boise State. But a ton of teams, a ton of players, a ton of coaches under a microscope in week 2, and we'll see how they respond. It's going to be really interesting to watch this unfold. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about my best bets for this upcoming weekend. I have about 8 for you today, and we'll keep track of this throughout the year and see just how good I can do in this betting world. But we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.